Hey everybody, it's Tripl-L coming in to talk about My Hero Academia chapter 282, The Footsteps of Destruction, or it was something like that. I don't see the title right now, but it was something like that. Anyway, hey everyone, welcome. Hope you're having a great weekend or the end of the weekend, and I hope you're having a great day. So, for this video, the first part's going to be a general note. I'm mostly talking about the situation with how Shoto arrived, because that was a very interesting situation we talked about in chapter 274 and 275. And then we're going to move into just the page-by-page walkthrough. It'll be a super simple video. I've got like 4 pages of notes. Don't know how long that'll take me to get through. Depends on how much ad-libbing I do, but here we are. Overall, first, I think it was a pretty cool chapter. I was excited. I'm very interested. This feels like a kind of, we're going in a straight line for a good portion of time, and I feel like now we've just reached a junction point. And that junction point pretty much, is Shigaraki going to be super aggressive beyond this point, or is he going to start to retreat at this point? That's the junction that we're kind of at here. And Higanto showing up, that does represent the junction, because now it's like, well, with him, we're probably going to deal with him for a little bit longer. Worst case scenario, we have a chapter of just mayhem next week. But ideally, we just see a flashback and we end up with Higanto approaching Shigaraki or something like that. Hopefully, like the end is in sight for this, because this has to be leading into another arc, ideally. Anyway, that aside, let's get into the main thing I want to talk about, and that is Shoto actually showed up and actually saved Aizawa. When I said this at the end of the last video, it felt like it was right, but I didn't think it would go this way so perfectly. So that was actually really neat to see, but there are some things here, and that it all starts and ends with Shigaraki noting that Shoto was coming after them, and the specific panel that the author used to reference that knowledge. So first, I want to say, of course, props to everyone that was absolutely sure that someone was coming after Izuku and Bakugo. I'm pretty sure that I think I said that that might have been possible. I think I was more leaning towards, well, in my mind, I was more leaning towards people not showing up because of what was going on in the chapters and the way it worked out. And that's what the focus is going to be for this particular portion. But before that, of course, props to everyone that got it, and props to Sarge. I know you had it, and I promised you a shout out here. But yeah, so what I want to do on this first step is just talk about what's going on here with what the author did, because this kind of does tell us a little bit and gives us an insight as to the work environment at the Hero Academia studio. So let's go back. Chapter 274, I pointed out the weirdness in how this whole thing with Shoto was drawn, but here's what we got. Here's a shot from chapter 274 at the beginning. Here's the shot from the end of chapter 274. This is the shot that the author is referencing in this chapter. This is where the first trouble really starts. I'm gonna use some video editing magic and do a very quick overlay. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Do you see the difference? Do you see what's going on there? Now, mind you, I didn't get the scaling right. One of the shots is a little bit more zoomed in than the other. But what you can see here is that the images essentially match up to each other perfectly in terms of relative distance to each other when you look at the distance between the lights. You can tell it's the same positioning of the lights, just slightly scaled up because of the slight distortion. Anyway, the thing that you have to take away from this is that you can slot Izuku and Bakugo into the spacing that is apparently created from Shoto following, even though Shoto is at the same distance away from the rest of the group in both shots. So what this lets us glean is that there's definitely copy and pasting going on. The configuration of the group is too perfect, and Shoto's spacing from the group is too exact. Chances are this group is the main copy, with the Bakugo and Izuku dots being the ones that are independently adjusted. And chances are this one that the author referenced is the first original copy, and then the one at the beginning of chapter 274 was the pasted copy. So at this stage, we can just say, oh, okay, this might just be an issue of a time-saving technique becoming misleading because there's maybe some miscommunication. It's probably a rush. We know that if something goes wrong, you're going to end up with a very sketchy-looking chapter, and that's okay. It's just the hecticness of an environment. If you ever worked in a team setting on sensitive projects, you know that when communication falls down even a little bit, things get kind of wonky. So at that stage, we can do that. But then we have chapter 275. And it's like, okay, Mr. Author Man, you have lights in front of the mountains, and that itself is also excusable, even though it doesn't make sense for the lights to be in front of the mountains. But we have 7, and 7 is the matching number to what you showed us in chapter 274 of the people that Izuku and Bakugo left behind. And they're all close together, including the light that you would think is Shoto, because there was only ever 7 lights aside from Izuku and Bakugo. So I see no indication of Shoto following them when you have... So I see no indication of Shoto following them when you have the lights so closely huddled. And even if you were to say one of these lights is Shoto, it's so closely huddled to another light. So therefore, I see no indication of the reality that the author is trying to sell to the readers. Okay, so I was just going through the editing and I just made a note about chapter 275's material, and I was a little bit too hasty there. I was saying that I didn't have any indication, but there's actually something going on here with 275. Now that we know that the author was saying that Shoto was the one that was coming behind them, even though the chapter 274 stuff sticks, I remember that we had I brought up there were 9 lights when there really should only be 8 if we're assuming that Thingamabob was using search as according to who Ragdoll saw. So I want to show you something here real quick. If you look at where the lights are lining up, and I try to do my best here, you will notice that there is a light missing in the left group. I'll point it out right here. And then if you look at where we would assume Shoto to be, there is a light behind him. So what that says is that if we assume that Shoto is the one running, and we know that there is a missing light, given what we know from who was fixed and who wasn't, it really seems there is someone else coming. Now, my first guess is Nejire. It just makes sense that she would be the one to show up because Ryukyu's in trouble. But can we justify Nejire being seen by Ragdoll? I don't know. There could be someone else from Class 1A there, but I think we've seen all the Class 1A members. It's really Class 1B. They're the only other people that we know for sure have been recorded. But regardless, when we do a hard comparison with 274, the fact is one person is going in the same line as Shoto is. So that's kind of exciting. Going back to the regular video now, where I continue to rag on the author for a little bit. But honestly, I don't want to say it's cheap deception. It honestly feels more like this is just the product of a hectic work environment, and the author is doing his best to try and justify it with what he had. Now, mind you, he did do a little bit of a trick with how he referenced this particular panel, but we'll talk about that when we get there. Anyway, in this case, it's just unfortunate that some of the visual cues or the visual clues are painting an opposite reality to what the author is saying. Okay, so all that considered though, still, props to everyone that got it right. It's just kind of unfortunate. Well, in my perspective, it's just kind of unfortunate that this seemed to be like a hard situation. But props to everyone that understood the intent. To the author's credit, when he had Endeavor looking off in the distance, that felt to me like Shoto was coming, and that's why I felt pretty comfortable saying that Shoto was going to show up in the next chapter here. But yeah, we move into the page-by-page walkthrough, and we start with page 1. Izuku's sleeves rip apart, and it's always so interesting to see the sleeves ripping apart for Izuku. It really lends to the idea that there's some other kind of force being exerted from Izuku's body. And if you look at the shreds, they're spiraling outwards as if a tornado was surrounding Izuku's arms, because the directions that the shreds are going in are different on either side of the arm. So it's not just a simple swing up that's ripping things apart. It's just always kind of interesting whenever he goes 100%. Anyway, on this page, we also had Ryukyu noticing the bullet. And interestingly, in the fan translation, Ryukyu never said it was a quirk erasing bullet. She just said it was a bullet itself. So I'm curious if Ryukyu could see well enough to see enough of the bullet to figure out or to note that it was a deleter bullet, or if she just made that call using context clues and what she knew about the situation surrounding the bullets. Now, when you see all this unfolding, though, it makes you kind of think that maybe Shigaraki should just have had real bullets. I mean, if he can fire a bullet well enough for it to pierce the skin, give him a handful of regular bullets. and let him just headshot people, because like, why not? Like, why dumb yourself down with a quirk bullet when you can just kill the person with the quirk? The doctor really should have just fabricated some lead bullets for Shigaraki to just grab a few out of a box when he's leaving the lab. A pocket of those and a good chunk of the heroes are just flat out dead. And given the speed and precision with which Shigaraki can launch, that he can do this even when Izuku just throttled him over the head. And the doctor is bioengineering people. I'm sure he has the means to fabricate some regular lead bullets. It wouldn't be that hard. And you know, of course, at this point, it's also worth pointing out that Shigaraki being able to aim so well despite all the circumstances is also really, really unfair. This page also invokes hope that Gran Torino can still be saved, which I myself am really pushing for, and we do later see that Bakugo shows up. So I do hope that Bakugo checked out Gran Torino and maybe dealt with that, but hard to say. Maybe Bakugo's gonna be the one that tells Izuku that Gran Torino's dead. One more thing I want to say is, like, I love how even if the heroes aren't able to do something to Shigaraki, little things matter. Like Ryukyu saying that that was a bullet that he had in his hand. We saw how much of a difference that made. I love these little contributions amounting to a bigger picture. I think this is a really good way of making characters feel worthwhile, because that information that Ryukyu gave, only Ryukyu could have given that heads up in that particular situation. So it's wonderful when you see characters being that competent. Like, even more so if she just deduced that was a quirk erasing bullet from context clues. Page 2, we see the 100% smash, and we'll talk about Izuku's arm on another page. Page 3 is one of my favorites. So the big wrinkle from the last chapter was that there were 2 bullets. Here in page 3 comes Eagle Eye Bakugo correctly spotting that there was another bullet, and then correctly blasting that bullet. So what a badass. On the remainder of the page, we have Shigaraki's internal thoughts, and those kind of sound like they were a protagonist speech. It's kind of odd hearing Shigaraki talk about dreams and heart, but it has a cool effect. Also, Shigaraki's teeth are busted beneath Izuku's arm, and like, holy, did you see Izuku's arm? That's not the arm of a boy, that's the arm of a man. Like, holy crap, Shigaraki's just fitting that in his whole mouth. Like, his jaw should have been dislocated. Okay, you know, it was a great visual. It was a great visual, and it was really brutal. Even though all that happened, Shigaraki is still able to manage the bullet, and I really want to call bullshit on that. Like, it's not fair that he can do that when he can barely see over Ryukyu's arm in some shots. Like how is he doing that? Does he have echolocation figured out? I mean, maybe the doctor might have been able to give it to him. But yeah, moving on to page 4. So the bullet hits, and I think this is the details to note here though are that 1, Aizawa had the knife ready to go from the moment Ryukyu said bullet. 2, this shot of Shigaraki is a copy and paste close-up of the shot from page 3, and you can tell because of the positioning of the blood splatters. The reason the author did the close-up though was to make this eye a little more noticeable, so as to say that Shigaraki was still conscious and keeping an eye maybe on Aizawa, which is cool. And again, I'm curious as to how Shigaraki could see over Ryukyu when you look at his positioning in some of the shots. It's just kind of unreasonable. Like, if Shigaraki has some kind of like weird bat organ in his head right now, that's not a big deal, but like, it's just kind of unreasonable. Page 5, we have an absolutely wonderful thought process for Aizawa. Little details here are Meteor was in the shot with Eri, and you can tell because of the belt, and Aizawa's quirk was still active after getting shot due to the glowing effect that we can see here in his eye. Now, what's interesting is that the bullet didn't take immediate effect like it did with Meteor. Now, there is a justification. The Nomu, when it crushed Aizawa's leg, it might have crushed blood vessels. And in that regard, like, think about it. The Nomu has superior super strength, right? Just because of the augmentation. So there's no reason to believe that the Nomu would just kindly grab Aizawa's leg without exerting all of its strength, especially when it's about to die, right? So I'm thinking when it grabbed its leg, it must have squished the blood vessels. It must have ruptured quite a lot of them, and one of them might have been the one that got hit. So when I see Aizawa cutting it off, I think that's just him being cautious, which again, it does, like, even if he does have a ruptured blood vessel that prevented the thing from leaking out, that doesn't remove the fact that Aizawa was being a badass for cutting off the leg. And besides, like, Ectoplasm's lost a leg before, UA teachers lose limbs, like, I'm sure he'll be fine. Mr. Compress is living a perfectly fine life with his super arm. UA has Mei. I'm sure Aizawa will be fine. Page 6. So this is an important page, as it tells, because we have Shigaraki telling us what actually happened. So we see that Aizawa still has the glowing effect. so the quirk's still active, so the bullet didn't take effect. But Shigaraki tells us that he flinched for a moment, and thanks to that, we can see that Shigaraki's face recovers. And here you can compare shots to see that there is in fact a recovery occurring in his face. At page 7, it seems like Shigaraki was recovered enough to be able to use his body better to also like create a shockwave when he moved. But it's also possible that he used Air Blast to propel away, given that Izuku was thrown off of him. And, if he used Air Blast, he could also just use his muscle power as well, just to make the shockwave. Like, Shigaraki make shockwaves without a quirk, so that doesn't feel unreasonable. But the Air Blast, I think, also feels reasonable because we saw the indication that he got his quirks back for a moment. On this page too, we see Izuku reach for Shigaraki with Black Whip, while also wrapping Black Whip around his arm. So that was pretty neat to see. It seems like he's using that as a little bit of reinforcement, and we do see that idea bolstered in the chapter. So page 8 was really cool. We see Endeavor miss the action by just a moment due to the motion lines, and that's just like, so close. And then we do in fact see that Aizawa erased Shigaraki's quirks once more, given that everything started cracking again if you look at his his hand. Also, we see how Black Whip was able to catch up to Shigaraki, grabbing hold of him right as he grabbed Aizawa, which says that Black Whip moves at ridiculously fast speeds. Now, in page 9, in the Shoto arrival page, all I gotta say is that, on one of the live streams, I've played with the idea of Shoto getting killed by Shigaraki or maimed. And I'm not saying that's going to happen to Shoto or that I hope that's going to happen to Shoto, but like someone also said they gave me $20 if Shoto actually dies, and my pocket feels pretty empty. So maybe I might be a little bit biased, but jokes aside, it was actually cool to see that this worked out. I still think it was just funny, but it was cool to see him show up here. It is worth pointing out that it seems that Shoto is significantly slower than Bakugo and Izuku, given the clues as to when exactly Shoto took off after them. With Shigaraki referencing chapter 274, he's saying that Shoto took off after Bakugo and Izuku immediately after. So it's just interesting that he was so far behind. Like, we know Bakugo is struggling, or he's doing his best to keep up with Izuku, and Izuku's at 50%. So it makes sense to me that Shoto is slow. Now, in regards to Shoto dying, let's just very quickly get my thoughts out here. Shoto dying to me is pretty much, the idea I have in my head is the author is using Shoto as a tool to further Endeavor and Izuku. Now, me personally, I don't really like the idea of characters' deaths furthering other people. I'm not a fan of that kind of use of characters. I don't like it being used too much. So I'd rather that not be the case. But at this point, I also wouldn't be surprised if that ended up being the case. Like, the big thing that I get from the live streams is Shoto is a super popular character, so killing him would be crazy. And I do agree with that. But it doesn't take that much for an author to want to be contrarian to popular demand or whatever else like that. And even if Shoto just gets maimed, that would be good enough too. So I legitimately hope Shoto's going to be okay. That's really what I'm feeling here. But Endeavor's already invoked that he's a little bit attached to Shoto, for lack of a better word. So this might lead into some complications in the fight in the immediate future. So we have to keep an eye out for that. So page 10 is the interesting page. There's a little bit of craftiness going on here. And it's here on the image that the author chose to justify the twist. See, the author cut off the rest of the lights. And that was a practical choice because, the focus is on the 3 lights. But doing this makes the conclusion that Shigaraki draws seem more credible given the information. Because otherwise, if he puts the rest of the lights in that same shot, it'd be too easy to do the one-to-one comparison and then note the distance between Shoto and lights and notice that Shoto had never really moved at all when relative to the other lights. So I think that's why he kind of just squeezed them out. Or I think that's something that probably made him go whew, yeah, let's remove that part just to push this. Let's push this narrative. But yeah, it was interesting. It was interesting. Him using that as a reference point is really what I think puts a wrench into things a tiny little bit. On page 11, we get a tearful smash from Izuku, like the poor kid. Note here, however, Izuku used the busted up hand that just did 100%, and he's wrapped it with Black Whip. So I think this is really cool that he is able to still use his arm well enough. I feel like we are totally going to get a reflection moment in the future where Izuku notes that he notes how he was able to save his hand. and he notes why he had to wrap Black Whip around it. So to get that particular kind of scene where he reflects on what he's doing, it would either have to be during the battle in the heat of the moment or during a recovery scene. And I'm really hoping for the recovery scene, because the recovery scene, by wanting a recovery scene, it says that there needs to be a place to recover in, right? So that's, I'm betting for that future is pretty much what I'm hoping for here. So I hope he gets into a hospital. On page 12, we see that Izuku is still wrapping Black Whip around his arm and is still usable. And we see him carry Aizawa, Manuel, and Rocklock away. We also see that Aizawa's hair has fallen onto his face, which indicates that his quirk might be turned off. And it's really hard to tell how extensive the damage to Aizawa is, but he does have another eye still open. So I'm hoping that he'll be able to do something about Shigaraki in the near future. It really depends. On page 13, we've seen that Shigaraki just pretty much tanked the smash that Izuku gave him, and we see his body. So important to note here is that he's lost Exless's cape, so no more will Exless be covering his body. But we also note that the regen doesn't seem to be perfect. It looks like we can see scar-like indentations in his body, so this is good. This tells us that there is a limit here. He isn't just perfect. Unfortunately, though, it looks like Shigaraki is still willing to go at it with his destruction is all that awaits you line. I'm actually really curious if All For One is going to step in, like, you know, Higantomachia arrives and then the All For One vestige is like, okay, that's enough for today. No more breaking your body, you stupid kid. And then just pull him out, like just, you know, pull a kill switch. I wonder if the vestige can do that. The only problem is, I don't know, well, I don't feel comfortable saying that the vestige is capable of that kind of judgment, because the vestige right now seems to be driven by emotional drives. So I don't know, it seems unlikely, but that would be a really cool twist, and that would put a wrench into this whole idea that Shigaraki has control. Page 14 confirms that Ochako did in fact not go after Izuku, which is unfortunate, because we know there was a good chunk of people that wanted to see Izuku discover float when he saves Ochako or something like that. So no Izuku saves Ochako scenes. Like, maybe it'll change in like 4 chapters or something. Anyway, on this page, we have Ida informing us how the thing with Todoroki went. Just give us an idea of what he said. And we also have the confirmation that comms are working outside of Shigaraki's blast zone, which makes sense. The terrible page. It sucks, where we find out that at least 19 cities are in danger, with Ochako commenting that the heroes are away, which leads to an interesting revelation. So 1, Ochako's line is here to say that if the majority of heroes are away, that means there's no one left to carry out evacuations proactively, which in other words means pray that vigilantes are about to step up, because otherwise people are about to die here. Or, you know, alternatively, pray that regular people are about to become heroes. But this does lead to another interesting thought, that being that the majority of cities are implied to be empty. Now, how many daily crimes do you think are committed by the Paranormal Liberation Front members? Like, how much a percentage do you think they are responsible for? Now, most certainly, given the reclusive style of this particular organization gathering their forces, it's probably not a high percentage. So with that said, think about this. How many times on this particular day have people wondered, why is a hero never around when you need them? I mean, in Hero Academia, we've seen the world's rate of incidents. Endeavor's out doing his job, homeless people try to ambush him, he goes to teach kids stuff, deals with a guy on a scooter, I believe, and stops Truck-kun from sending someone into an isekai plot. And then Bakugo and Shoto, they're coming back from an exam, boom, one-time villains are acting out and they gotta step out and go deal with that. Hawks is out on a lunch date with Endeavor, casually stops a radical person. Think of how bad a situation is that you have to send the majority of your forces to deal with one single organization, and in doing so you leave your cities undefended so that all the independent contractors can take a whack at mayhem. That's a pretty bad situation. So even not counting Higanto, given that Hero Academia is a world where someone would try to mug someone in Endeavor's home turf that everyone knows is Endeavor's home turf, it's only reasonable to conclude that this is going to be a very miserable day for citizens, not counting Higanto's activities. So when you see this particular situation, the reality is Hero Society isn't oversaturated. If it were, you wouldn't have this possible gaping hole in it. And if Hero Society really were oversaturated, you wouldn't have the commission trying to give people that fail the exam second chances the way they have. They need more heroes. We know this is a thing, and this might be a very brutal way of seeing that reminded. Also on this page, it's also worth just wondering what exactly happened to everyone that was in that area, because we see that Gang Orca is down, so that says that Majestic's crew probably went down. I'm also curious as to how many people are riding on Giganto. Now I got one more note on the commission, but first, page 17, we see Giganto. He looks happy, in all honesty. It looks like he's in battle mode. His arm looks pretty cool. So at this point, we're saying that we expected this. As you recall, Giganto suddenly showing up and then getting a flashback to the event was something that we considered here. Although I expected Giganto to be closer to Shigaraki the next time we saw him. But this is good too, because this is going to make me feel pretty bad. And honestly, seeing this, it's really sad to know that the plan failed. I do wonder if there's still going to be a trick, like maybe Giganto falls asleep after reaching Shigaraki or something like that. In regards to the people in the town, the best thing is that Giganto is only going in a straight line, and most cities are not built in a straight line. So Giganto being like at most the size of 2 city streets, you know, this isn't the worst that it could have been. I mean, the damage is going to be horrible, but at least it's not the same as a bomb going off in the center of the city. A good chunk of people are going to survive this, enough to be scarred by what they saw. Now, on that note, this woman, this guy, this person, this elderly couple, this kid, these people, this lady, this guy, this person that just noticed the destruction, good luck. I legitimately hope you survive. This is gonna suck. And honestly, all these people should have felt the ground rumbling, but they didn't, and now they're about to get Attack on Titan. So I am praying for the best. Which leads to my final thoughts. I really hope people don't just blame the heroes for this. Leaving cities undefended, that's not something the heroes have any control over. That's the commission's call. The heroes and the police just move as the commission tells them to. And at that point, I would also want to say that with Hero Society, the heroes are essentially the same as the police and the government, in that they only really work if there's only a few negative aspects in society. If too many people are in the negative aspects or in the violent aspects of society, the heroes just, there aren't enough heroes to be able to deal with them safely. Because like for every one villain, you might need 4 heroes to be able to take him down without actually incurring any loss of life. So it's a pretty terrible exchange. Ideally though, like I said earlier, I hope that people are a little bit nicer here. Like I hope they take aim at the commission, because things like making an assumption that Giganto isn't going to move, that sounds like something that people who were safe in their offices and never really saw the battlefield would think would be a safe conclusion to make. Like they might have been told, yeah, like it's an 80% chance that Giganto is not going to move from here, and they're thinking 80%. That's a surefire victory. We're doing it. And it's like, no. That's insane. Only office suits would be the ones to not take into account the worst case scenario. So I really hope it's not just the heroes that take the fall here. And at the very least, the people that were rescued from the hospital and Jakku should be willing to defend the heroes, because they would have seen heroes dying in front of them in real time. So yeah, you know, like where do we go from here? What's going to happen next? Well, Makia showing up next to Shigaraki, that's pretty much guaranteed unless like a super powerful hero shows up right now. Like maybe a powerful hero shows up to stop him, but I don't think that's going to happen. The most conventional thing would be to show a quick flashback of what happened with the kids that were over by Gigantomachia. Maybe there's a kid that is latched onto him, or maybe there's some kind of trick that the kids will show us that was applied to Makia before he got away, like something like that. It's also worth noting that Shigaraki seems to be clear-headed here, so he might not go after Izuku immediately, which really makes you feel like there might be a crossroads here. Izuku's also distanced himself from Shigaraki, which seems to indicate that something strange is about to happen with the flow of the battle. It feels like we're heading into a small bump in that otherwise straight line that we had earlier. But yeah, man, pretty rough. Like, people are gonna die. Like, there's no way around it. That train's done for. You know, one thing I'm thinking about with Skeptic, I really think at the end of this, maybe Skeptic is just there so that Shigaraki can broadcast a message saying, hey, I'm going to destroy all of Japan, so get ready, guys. Who knows? Who knows how they're going to do it? But yeah, fun chapter of Hero Academia. Depressing. Super, super depressing. But people got away with this. Like, when it comes to bullets, it seems like the 2 bullets amounted to nothing. Aside from Aizawa losing his leg and giving Shigaraki that moment to hurt him, Aizawa still has his quirk, so it's not the worst case scenario, still pretty terrible, but not the worst case. Guys, let me know what you thought down below, and I'm going to end it there. We're not 40 minutes yet, so thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought down below, and until next time, I hope you have an absolutely great day.